So I'm Sarah Pearman. We have got three guests with us today, all on the boards of housing associations. So that's today's focus, is seeing if we can inspire you, excite you about joining the board of a housing association. So first of all, we've got Sarah O'Neill. Sarah is a portfolio NED and Chair with a background in fast-moving consumer goods as a sales and marketing director. She is not from a housing background. She is now chair of the Willow Housing Partnership, a Southwest housing association with 1,500 homes, and a board member of Homes in Somerset, and ALMO, an arm's length management organisation of Somerset Council with 4,400 homes. And she's a board member of the Housing Diversity Network, a national diversity promoting organisation in the housing sector. So thank you, Sarah, for being with us. We've got Vipul Thacker. Vipul is a housing professional. He is our resident housing professional today, and he is now a board member too. So he's at Notting Hill Genesis as his day job. He's Group Director of Central Services. He presents to the board, but he's not a board member. Notting Hill Genesis are one of the largest housing associations in the UK. They've got 67,000 homes. He is now a board member at B3 Living. They have 5,500 homes. He is a group board member and an operations committee member, and this was his first board role. So lastly, Ibby Ismail. Ibby had no prior housing experience, became a tenant board member, which we'll explain a bit later on, and is now, I'd say, doing a couple of board roles. He's done several now, having started at that point. So he's development manager, totally outside of the housing sector, but sharing the heart at Bolton Solidarity Community Housing Association, a charity that works mainly but not exclusively with communities around refugees and asylum seekers in Bolton. He's also the senior independent director at Moscare St Vincent's Housing Group, MSV, and they have 9,000 homes, and he's in at Cobalt Housing, which have 6,000 homes. So there we go. You've got a bit of a sense of the mix that we've got: resident to board member, housing exec to board member, and totally outside of the housing sector into housing boards with Sarah. So Ibby, could you start off by setting the scene for us? What is a housing association? And if people have experience of council housing, how's it moved on since?
People will ask, often get the terms mixed between council housing and housing associations. Housing associations are largely not-for-profit organisations that provide homes and services at lower than market rent. So that could be in various different forms, such as social rents, which is about 50% of what the market rent will be, or affordable rents, which are about 80% of what market rents averages would be. Housing associations came about, I think, in the 90s and early 2000s, and they were formed as a stock transfer from traditional local authority housing into housing associations, which were set up to deliver those homes and services. They develop about a third of new housing per year nationally. So new developments and new housing, about 33% of that is contributed through housing associations. So there are housing associations, as a collective, are quite significant in terms of building new housing, providing new homes for the future as well. That's, I think, what housing associations are in a nutshell. They're a lot of fun as well.
That's great. We'll get to more of that later, Ibby. Maybe we'll start off with, why did you want to become a non-exec? Sarah, give me a sense.
Hi, everybody. For me, I wanted to become a non-exec because I really enjoyed that strategic conversation that Sarah mentioned earlier. And I enjoyed the opportunity to be across more areas of an organisation than my executive role would have kept me confined to, really. We're all used to that siloed working. And I also thought it was a real opportunity to make a difference. So for me, I had some experience of being on a board of a charity, and then I got a role in a smaller non-exec role and just realised how much I enjoyed it, which is what then persuaded me to make the transition into being a portfolio non-exec.
Brilliant. And Vipul, what about you?
So first of all, thank you very much for inviting me this. I've been in housing for far too long to remember. So over the years, I've developed a passion for the sector. And unlike most people, I actually did choose housing as a career. So that's where I did. When I joined housing, there were too many people who didn't look like me. And yes, it's improving, but that was one thing. And over the years, the level of satisfaction that I've been getting and working in housing is immense. So I can go home and tell my family and my son that today I found homes for 4 homeless people. And that's just amazing feeling. Secondly, as a caretaker of this work, and I describe myself as a caretaker of this wonderful sector, I have 2 personal ambitions. One is leave it in a better place than I found myself in. And secondly is espouse the next generation of talent to join in, because there's so much that we do. We are, just to put it in context, if Notting Hill Genesis was in a FTSE, we would be in the top 250 for FTSE index. So we are a big, large organisation. We've got £3.5 billion of debt. We've got £20 billion of assets. So it is a big organisation. We should remember that. So there is a more career in that. And thirdly, it was a slightly selfish reason as well as self-development and improving myself. So as a senior manager in large sector, it was in my interest to understand how a board works. Why do board members behave the way they do? What do they actually see? What is it that they need so I can help them as an exec? So it was kind of, yes, there's a selfish motive as well in becoming a board member. And then I'm talking to the rest of the people, those of you who know Sarah Pearman, when you get an email from her, it's very difficult to say no. So Sarah contacted us, Dynamic Boards contacted us to ask me whether I would be interested. And I found it very difficult to say no, because I was told why it was the right thing for me to do. And when the organization I joined in B3, they were very honest. They wanted someone with sector experience. They wanted someone to be open. They wanted they were open about the fact that they needed to address diversity. They wanted someone who was not necessarily an experienced board member. So it kind of fitted in. And that's the reason why I joined in. And to date, I think that's the best decision I've made.
That's brilliant, Vipul. And I'm sure you found that understanding, like you're sitting two sides of the fence. You're on one side, you're the exec, and a certain number of days a month, you're non-exec side. So it helps your understanding of that exec role. That's really good point. And Ibby, what about you? So tell us about how you first became a non-exec and kind of what motivated you there.
Lived experience. I lived in one. So I was living in social housing at the time, and I'm dead nosy as well. So I just wanted to find out how things worked and things like that. And just because of my background as well and a lot of experience around governance and things like that, I did feel that I had something to offer and something to give, but from a lived experience angle. So not enough people that lived in social housing were actually on boards of housing associations, so go figure. So I think intrigue and the fact that I lived in one was the main motivators of why I wanted to go into housing association, but loved it ever since.
That's great. So how did you get comfortable? As with many sectors, this sector does have a lot of challenges, whether that's damp issues or building safety. How did you get comfortable with that? I guess, Vipul, you've seen it both in day job and in this non-exec role.
Absolutely right. No, I mean, I said I started in housing for a long time, and ever since I've been in housing, there's always been a housing crisis. So that bit's always there. There's always a need for people to have safe, warm, affordable homes. So that's one thing. But increasingly, and I find it post-COVID as well, the expectations of our customers and of our residents, quite rightly, are rising. They want a good service. They want to be treated with respect. You add in the new legislation requirements that are coming along, and sadly, we've had a couple of really bad events that happened, Grenfell to name one, and then you look at Awab's death. And all those things makes it very difficult to be a landlord. And remember, we are a registered social landlord. And as a social part comes in a lot, because by the very nature, people who come and live with us have got vulnerabilities, have got have got other needs than just a roof over their head. So you're not only giving them a roof over the head, you're providing them a home, you're also providing them with other information, other support, and directing them to delivering that. And so it's a challenge. But as I said, after doing that challenge, you can go home and feel that you've done good for someone. And that keeps continuously motivating you to do the job that you do.
Whether you're on the board or not, those challenges exist. So exactly. You could be there to help. Sarah, what about you?
Yeah, I think housing is a great sector to go into, because you do have that real opportunity to make a difference. And even with fixed terms, from when you start to when you finish, you can really see some of the changes that you've made. There are definite challenges in the sector. There's constantly changing government policy. We have issues with the quality of the housing stock that we have in the sector, maintenance and getting it to be sustainable and compliant with the net zero targets is a challenge. Finding the finance and the funding is a challenge. So I could tell you all of the challenges that we face, but there is huge opportunity to feel like you are making a difference, and giving people a sense of place and a home. It enables them to access so many other things, whether it's jobs, education, sense of community, healthcare. I mean, it's a basic human right, if I was being dramatic, but genuinely, you feel like you are making a difference being in this sector. It's not necessarily the most highly paid NED job, but I do think it's a particularly rewarding one to do, and you have some great challenges that you can really get your teeth into.
Yeah, and Sarah, I remember when we were talking previously, you told me about an example of someone who was bedbound and how one of the organisations had helped them. Do you want to share that one?
Yeah, so Homes in Somerset, they identified a blended family with a father who had severe disabilities, and they identified that we needed a different type of home that we didn't currently have within the portfolio, and they made it their job to actually create that home for the family, something where they could all live together and that fitted his needs. And that's something I think that we're all really proud of.
It's amazing, Sarah. And I guess it's that mission-driven organisation that is the priority to serve the tenant base, to make sure it's sustainable, but it is serving individuals. So it sounds like, yeah, that sort of story and the one Vipul mentioned about, going home with those 4 homeless people that you found homes for, that really rings to what the housing sector was established to do. And that's hopefully excites you when you're watching this as well of what you could be part of. So Sarah, you were an outsider to the sector. It's a regulated sector. It's complex. There's a huge amount of regulatory burden on organisations, and it's not decreasing for sure. How did you get your head around that as an outsider before applying?
So I think the first thing is, whatever NED role you go into, you've got to have a passion for it and an interest. So when I decided to go into being a portfolio NED, I identified a couple of sectors that I was very passionate about, and I focused on that. That passion enabled me to put the groundwork in to learn about the sector. If you haven't got the passion, you won't want to do that, and you won't get the interview, or if you get the interview, you won't be credible. So I'd say if you're on the fence about housing, then maybe look at another sector. But having the passion, for me, I was very willing to put the groundwork in and to learn about the sector. And there are various organisations within the sector, like the National Housing Federation, the Tenant Participation and Advisory Service, that have a lot of information, newsletters. There are various ways in which you can gain information and immerse yourself. But the other thing that I did on my journey to becoming a NED, I think it's important that you can demonstrate your board experience. So either, reporting into a board or being on a board as an executive, or alternatively, what proxy board experience that you've got. I became a trustee of a charity, and I worked very hard for that charity, and I really enjoyed it. It was a larger charity. Being in the charity sector, it is regulated. And I volunteered to chair 2 subcommittees for that charity. So then when I came to housing, I could talk about my experience of operating in a regulatory environment, and I could also demonstrate my good governance skills and that I could operate on a board. It was a larger charity with a turnover of 3 million and 70 staff. So the housing associations and housing diversity network, when they looked at me, they could see that I would fit, I was capable, I had the skills, even if I didn't come from housing, but I also knew enough about housing that they weren't going to have to spoon feed me if they took me on.
Yeah, and you were serious about the role. They could
Yeah.
tell that. And Sarah has very kindly, with Vipul and Ibby's help, we've pulled together a list of resources that you might want to have a look at when you are applying. So thank you, Sarah, for your work on that. It will be really useful for people to get a bit of a head starter, some tips from those that are now in the know. So that regulatory piece, Ibby, can you give us a sense of what does GVC stand for as a starter, and give us a sense of that regulatory market?
Yeah, so like many sectors, the housing sector is a regulated sector, and it's regulated by the RSH, which is the Regulator of Social Housing. And basically, housing associations are assessed or inspected on 3 different criteria. So the G stands for governance. Is the housing association being governed well? Are the risks being escalated? Is there good information flows between the committees and the board, and going all the way up and going back down as well? So is it being governed well as a housing association. The V stands for viability. So is it being run well financially? And is it an organisation that can continue going in the future and providing the services that they are providing? And then the last one, which was introduced very, very recently, and it was very much as a response to Awabishak and Grenfell, etc., and other unfortunate incidents that have happened within the sector, was the consumer standard. And that is basically inspecting the housing association on how well are they providing services for their customers or tenants, and how well are they actually engaging with the customers as well. So is there customer voice in the decisions that they're making, or tenant voice in the decisions that they're making, and shaping the organisation as it's going forward in its strategy as well. Basically, it's 1 to 4. G1, V1, D1 would be at sort of the top end of the inspection, and G4 going in that respect as well would be the housing association is non-compliant. It then needs intervention straight away from the regulation of social housing as well. So that's the gist of housing. And housing associations are inspected roughly once every 4 years. So inspectors will come in, and as a board member, the people that they usually have sort of in-depth engagement with are the execs, but they will also have engagement with the chair of the board and also with the chair of audit as well. And they will observe a board meeting. And they're not there to catch you out or say gotcha or anything like that. It's just observe the board meeting. And my advice would be, if you was in that situation, is just to be yourself. That's what they want to see, the board operating in its sort of, in its average, normal way, whatever normal means. Hope that answers that question.
Thank you, Ibby. And I think quite often in adverts we see people that understand regulatory markets. And it can be that if you've got the experience of working with a regulator, even if you work in a different sector, it can give you an understanding of actually how you need to operate in a regulated environment. And if you don't, then maybe do a lot of research on the regulatory piece, because you might want to give some assurance during your interview of how you've prepared and how you'd understand that. And a question around the regulators' rating that they give up different housing associations. Would you say if one of them has been downgraded, it needs particularly experienced board members, particularly those who've got experience in the housing sector? So actually you're better off going for some of the ones that are better rated at the moment? Vipul's nodding. Sarah, curious to hear your view on that.
I think there's a yes and no answer to that. I'm sure people with prior experience would be really helpful. But I think what I've found coming into housing associations myself is actually having what I call my toddler questions, the yes, but why, and keep going, because there can be that, well, we've always done it that way, and we've tried that before and that didn't work, and that's how the way things are around here, and and housing isn't alone in that sort of thing. So I actually think if you've put the legwork in to get yourself up to speed on all of the regulation and the background to it, and you understand what the regulatory standards, for example, in consumer are aspiring to achieve, and you've read some of the maladministration findings from the ombudsman, so you've got that depth of understanding. I think actually no, it's not essential to have a housing background.
Great, thank you. Vipul, I
was just going to say, I totally agree with what Sarah said, and absolutely right. It's not essential, but it depends on why you've been downgraded. So if it's a C rating, it would help. But most essential would be if you can demonstrate some expertise in turning around an organization, able to deal with the challenges and in a regulatory world, then I think that's even more important. So I agree with you, Sarah.
Thank you. And what tips would you give for interviews, Ibby?
So apart from all of the due diligence stuff that yourself, Sarah, and Sarah also mentioned, and Vipul as well, I think one of the things that really I've found most beneficial in my experience in interviews is housing associations have little quirks and are different between each other. So it's a really good idea to actually look at their websites, not just look at the box standard things like board papers, risks, etc., but actually what they're proud of on the websites, because that really gives you a window of what makes that housing association them. And I think that's the kind of things that really stand out. Also, I think it's just the ability to sort of show your skills, and even if you're not from a housing sector background, how those skills transfer in a sort of a housing context, and just to show your passion for it as well, because I think more and more across the sector now they're looking outside of the sector, so they do realise that they need a breadth and a real diverse mix of people on their boards. So it's about actually just showing what really makes you want to be part of their organisation, what really makes you tick about housing, and what you know about them as well, to show that you've shown that due diligence, but just not from a generic level, but actually really focusing in on the organisation as well. And yeah, I think, again, they've chosen you for a reason. You sat there on the other side of the table for a reason. So be yourself again, because you must have stood out in their covering letter.
That's great. Thank you, Ibby. We've had a question come through here. Is there a classic study of how a social housing board was ineffective and led to governance failures for the organisations and tenants? Vipul, go on.
I would just say read a case study of Cosmopolitan Housing Association. That's an organisation that was found not to be delivering it, and that made substantive changes in the way housing associations are regulated. So yeah, I would ask you to do that. If you look up Notting Hill Genesis, you'll see that we've just been downgraded. Ibby mentioned about non-compliance. We've been downgraded just recently, and I'm quite happy to talk to individuals to where we went wrong and where the regulator thinks we went wrong. And it is about making sure that you're always on the ball, and you're always making sure that why do you exist? To deliver great homes for our residents. And if you keep on that, so I would suggest, like, my first take would be read the Cosmopolitan case if you ever get a chance. It's a really good case, and then call me. I'm really happy to talk.
Thank you, Vipul. That's very open of you. And is it a good first board role? So I guess Vipul and Ibby, it was for both of you, it was your first board role. Would you say it's a good place to start if you've not got any non-exec experience yet?
It is a great start in the sense of it gives you that opportunity to do something that you've always been passionate about. I would also say that make sure that you've done your risk, and as Ibby mentioned earlier on, it is about understanding why you want to do what you want to do. It is understanding what is it that you're going to take out of it. It is understanding about your time commitment. But research the company, because the values and what they're doing should match up with what you personally want to do. I would strongly recommend those who are thinking to jump into it, because you'll find that you will be able to deliver and learn a lot, and then decide whether you want to continue pursuing that as a portfolio career.
I think if you're ready and you're really passionate about it, yes, I do think that it does need is, just do in terms of really get into understanding housing before you sort of move into that. I think because it's a regulated sector, there's, and you're liable. I think that, you need to take that responsibility on board. However, if you are passionate about housing, if you're passionate about making difference in people's lives, a real tangible difference that you can actually see, and you're passionate about transforming areas and regeneration of areas from before and after, and just seeing it transform right before your very eyes, then I think, yeah, go for it. And a lot of the people in the sector actually are really inclusive. That's my experience, and I think they're always willing to share and learn, and you're not alone in this journey as well. So if you feel you're up for it, yeah, go for it.
Thank you, Ibby. And I know I would testament to that as well. I've been around the sector, around it, not in it, for 15 years, lending to it, and then through dynamic boards getting to know it as well. And I'd say it's definitely the most friendly sector I've worked in. There's definitely a lot of positivity around collaboration, learning from one another, and National Housing Federation is a phenomenal network to connect with. So that's a big testament to the sector's generosity of spirit. Sarah, maybe come to you. What surprised you since joining housing boards?
I'll give you a positive and a negative. I think the negative is the regulatory burden is quite intense, and you do spend a lot of time on the governance and ensuring you're compliant and seeing the deadlines and dotting the I's and crossing the T's for uploading the regulatory requirements. But the positive, I found, it's a really warm, inviting sector. I find it quite different to consumer goods. I think that there is a real passion of people. A lot of people work in the sector, and I think Vipul has articulated it very clearly, because they really want to make a difference, and it's about the mission, and the values that people work in it, and that can make it a really nice group of people, whether it's the non-execs or the execs, to work with, and I found it really rewarding.
Yeah, that certainly seems to come across consistently from all of you. And what about progression once you're there? How have you found progression, Ibby? So you came in as a tenant board member.
Honestly, I think we've got one of the best training programs in any sector, and I'm living proof of that. So I was just a person that lived in my home, which happened to be a social housing property. And, by the end of my tenure, I could talk to you about EBITDA, MRI. I could talk to you about loan covenants. I could talk to you about golden threads, stress testing, mitigations. I could go on, but that's all. I think that's just testament of, and that's just real life, what sort of opportunities of support that they do offer. And it's not just from external organizations as well. You can talk to the CFO, you can talk to the chief executive officer, you could talk to the assets person as well. They're always there as well, and they give you a comprehensive induction as well. So if you don't understand, there's no shame in it. It's just, the only shame is not asking, having that environment where you don't feel comfortable enough, or that culture enough to ask. So, and I've worked in many different sectors: education, health, housing, to name a few. And I think in terms of training and upskilling people, housing is number one for me. Gold medal.
That's brilliant, Ibby. And someone's asked a question that's kind of relevant here. How long does it take to typically get up to speed as a new NED? So, Ibby, how long did it take you to get confident talking about EBITDA?
It really does depend on the person, to be honest. And I think it's not about how long it will take. It's how confident you are in terms of, if you're not confident about a subject, speaking up and saying, I'm not confident about that. And housing does offer you that opportunity to go back again and keep on learning and growing and developing as well. So, you never get 100% perfect NED, and I'd be worried if you get one, to be honest. It's just always an opportunity to develop and grow, and I don't think you get up to speed ever, to be honest. I just think that you just keep on growing and developing and trying to get up to speed.
That's brilliant. And Ibby, there's context there. You've taken subcommittee chair roles, you're a senior independent director, so you have seen a lot of progression while you've been there. Sarah, you've become chair of the board. Tell us about your progression journey as well.
Once you've got a couple of board meetings under your belt, you will feel that you understand the organisation better and you're more confident in asking your questions. There are plenty of opportunities for continuous improvement, continuous learning, internally, externally, and a lot of that is free on offer from, the Federation, etc. But it does take time. But I think you do, if you take up the opportunities that are offered to you to learn, you suddenly realise you have capability to do more. And that's where, becoming a committee chair was something that I stepped up to quite quickly. And then I started to identify, actually, I think I had the skills to chair the board, and I began to consider that as an opportunity, and I've been doing that now for the last 18 months at Willow Tree.
That's brilliant. And I think that is something to understand as a non-exec. You come in and there is natural churn. Because board members are only ideally going to stay on the board for 6 years, there will be churn of those subcommittee chair roles, of the chair role. So there is that opportunity for development if that's something that interests you. And if you've got capacity, and I know, Vipul, your capacity is slightly different because you've got an exec role alongside your B3 living role. How have you found your employer letting you out for that time? How have you found those discussions? How have you balanced the two roles?
I'm very lucky that my employer actually did recognize that it was part of my self-development, and they understand that the wealth of experience I bring back to Notting Hill Genesis, learning from B3 Living. And this is the another thing I want to make it clear. Just because I'm working for a 67,000 housing landlord doesn't mean that I cannot learn from 5,500 B3 Living landlord. There's so many things that small housing association do fantastic, and we can learn from it, and so that's bringing it back. It is about juggling time. It is actually making sure that you have, I believe, if you're going to attend a board meeting and you're going to attend a meeting, you have to be well prepared. So it's about reading the papers in advance. It's actually understanding what you want to do. I actually spend a lot of time asking the questions before the board meeting, so that at least to get my clarity agreed and not getting into the detail. It is about finding time to work with other board colleagues and having that coffee and a tea or whatever you fancy, and having a discussion with the exec members. It also gives you an opportunity to champion causes. So I'm currently an ED and I champion at B3 wearing my board hat on. And it gives you to continue the passion that you want to bring in. So it does take time, and you have to balance the priorities. And that's the way I do it.
2 diaries, but you've got a very supportive employer. And what about the transition from exec to NED? How have you found that?
It's very interesting. As I said, as right at the beginning, it was to learn and understand and help me do my job. The way I always kind of describe it is it's the difference between an air traffic controller and being a pilot. Being a pilot is what an exec does. We are in charge of running the organization. But being an air traffic controller is where the board members and the board helps you to understand where the organization is going and supports you to get to the place where it needs to get to. And whilst you want to kind of get in as exec, I found it very difficult. So I'm going to be honest. When I joined the board, I really wanted to go into in the detail. And quite rightly, my colleagues at my B3 board and some of the exec kind of just reminded me to say, look, hang on, this is what we do, which is fine, which is the learning. And then the other thing is that when you attend board meetings, you're actually talking with other colleagues as well. And that gives you an idea as to where the discussions need to go to. It is okay to be different in board. It's okay. You have to bring in a different view, but you do take collective cabinet responsibility. And remember, the new regulations suggest that we are also, as a board member, forming a co-regulatory function. We have to continuously assure ourselves that what we are being shown and what we've been done is actually what gets done. So it's not about running the organization. So yeah, initially it was very difficult, but I think I'm getting there, and I guess you'll have talked to B3 colleagues to check whether I'm getting there or not. But yeah, it is different.
That sounds like you're making the adjustment well, and you've got the self-awareness to see yourself on that journey, which is super. And it's helpful for other people to hear that, because a significant proportion of the candidates that sign up to our site do have full-time roles, and we're really pleased that people are considering NED roles earlier in their career, because what that's done is expand the pipeline of potential NEDs. And it means that these NEDs that we're developing in their 30s, 40s actually have a lot of years that they can be giving back as NEDs on different organisations. So it's a huge opportunity there. So thank you, Vipul, for taking the scene on that. Lived experience is this phrase that you only ever hear in the housing sector. And boards still put them in their adverts, even though I say you need to explain what you mean by lived experience, because anyone outside the sector does not know what you are talking about. Ibby, can you give us a sense of what do they mean by lived experience, and what is the value of having lived experience on boards?
From my experiences, have you lived in social housing? So I think that's the sort of broad definition of lived experience within the housing sector that they're trying to allude to. I think it just adds so much. I do think that, unfortunately, I'm going to use the examples of Rochdale, Borough Housing and Grenfell. The first people that were telling the housing associations that there was a problem were the tenants themselves. And I think you do have that strategic overview, but sometimes you can get your head in the clouds and it loses the practicality and the reality that lived experience brings, so that it adds to your strategy, actually, and it makes the decisions that you make grounded in that kind of reality, and it's got that customer voice. I think it's fresh and it's different. And in a room full of housing professionals and accountants, you do need that diversity of voice, and diverse boards bring better decisions. There's evidence to prove that as well, that more diverse boards with diverse skills actually brings better decisions. So I think the fact that there's more tenants / customers, or whatever term that they use, getting onto these boards and bringing their experience and their skills, and they're not just bringing it as a tenant, but there's a whole human being that's had an education, learned things, and they're bringing that as well. So I do think that adds in terms of housing associations and ensuring that some of those things that happened in the past are less likely to happen in the future.
Thank you, Ibby. That is really helpful. So, logistics, travelling to meetings. Do you need to live locally to be on the board of a housing association? Sarah, any sense on that one?
I would say no, you don't need to live locally. Many housing associations have adopted virtual meetings for some, if not all, of their board meetings. You will have in-person meetings, so some will have a mix of in-person and virtual. You are very likely to have away days, either a single day or 2 days, either one or two of those during the year, depending on your organisation, and they will be in person. So you don't have to live locally. No, you do have to be prepared to travel when these things happen. And if you're working in a full-time job, you need to know that you can take the time off to be there, whether that's taken as holiday or whether it's supported by your employer. That is a critical one. But the good thing is housing associations will announce their calendar of meetings in advance. I'm just signing off on the dates for 26 and 27 for Willow Tree. So I will know to April 27 when my board meetings and away days are. So you will know, and if you've got a supportive employer, you should be able to work around that. The only thing I will say is on the local front, most organisations, if they are smaller, they will be looking for your local connection. So we've recently recruited, and thank you Dynamic Boards for supporting us. But when we have candidates from, say, London who are applying for a Southwest-based housing association, we want to understand their motivation and their availability. Because I think every organisation you're going to join is going to want to know that, you see them as the first choice. You're passionate about what they do, and and understand it, and you understand the specifics of the local area. Here in the Southwest, we have rural challenges as well as inner city challenges in Bristol, and people need to be able to get their head around that and be able to articulate that. So no, you don't need to be local, and we have people who live away and travel a considerable distance to some of our board meetings, but they are able to turn up consistently, and they keep themselves up to speed on what is happening in our geography so that they can contribute and understand those nuances.
Thank you, Sarah. That's very helpful. We've had a question come through. What advice would you give to positioning your softer skills and interests in your application? I'm a leadership coach completing a master's degree in organisational psychology. Who wants to pick up that one?
Let me kick in. My mum used to always tell me, I'll tell her this again. 2 ears, 2 eyes, 1 mouth. That's the bet you use, right? Use your 2 ears to listen to your and see and such like. But in terms of softer skill, be curious, ask questions, demonstrate empathy, understand where it's coming from, whether it's through lived in experience or whether through its understanding and working with them. But interestingly, as anyone would tell you, organization cultures matter. So understanding how the organizational culture works. Is it about being genuinely customer centric? Now, we always talk about customer centricity in housing, knowing full well that the customers that we get, the residents we get, don't have much choice.
Yeah.
If you can create an organization culture using your skills and interests and your soft skills, where you actually think that the resident must feel, we as staff must have that feeling that we are earning the custom of this particular resident, then I think you will meet the consumer legislation pretty well. So I think there's a lot of opportunities to use all the skills, and I would strongly recommend, especially if someone's got a master's degree in organizational psychology, this could be the role for you.
Sarah.
I'd completely echo that. And I think soft skills are really important in a NED role. If you start to, involve yourself in reading, blogs, articles, attending things like this, and reading the job adverts, there is a lot about softer skills, because you are, in a sense, influencing indirectly, and you have to work with a broad mix of people on the board, some of whom can have, very strong opinions or take an increased share of voice. You have to get yourself heard. You have to be able to agree on what can be very difficult, decisions, emotional decisions. And so soft skills are really important. So I think if I were in your shoes, I would be reading up and finding all of that sector information. But when I'm targeting a specific organisation, I would be looking at the language they use, looking to understand what's in their materials, their website, and I'd be asking those questions about what's important to them, and where you're given the opportunity to have a conversation with a recruiter or the chair or the CEO in advance, take it and ask that question: what does it take to succeed as a board member in this organisation? And that's where you'll then be able to say, yes, and I've got exactly those skills, and let me explain to you how I would put them to good use. You can reflect back what you've already heard if you genuinely believe you've got those skills, of course.
Thank you, Sarah. So someone's asked here, would you think a credit rating background might be attractive for a social housing board?
I would say definitely. Means I speak of my experience, and most housing associations are having to borrow money. There's not enough money ever to do anything. So as a result of that borrowing money and raising bonds and such like, understanding that commercial and the financial background would be really helpful. So if you got a credit rating background, absolutely. And that's another skill that you can bring in. As I always say, it's about being socially hearted and commercially minded.
We've just got a question come in. What do you suggest for someone that has an abundance of knowledge, skills, and things to offer with evidence, but doesn't fit the stereotypical applicant, and so doesn't get within a sniff of a role because it takes either too long to explain context or background, or because the ideal applicant is simply not the actual diversity that the organisation actually need? Curious what the person is like or does bring from that question. But Sarah, go on.
I'd say practice your elevator pitch. And what I mean by that is if you only had 60 seconds or 2 minutes, in an elevator or lift with somebody, what would you say? So you really need to condense what you're saying, because actually, if you're finding it really difficult to articulate your value add and your unique proposition, that perhaps demonstrates to people that you're talking to that you won't be economic and concise in a boardroom, and board meetings generally go at tremendous pace, and you have to be able to get yourself across really quickly and easily. If people have to work through, say, 4 or 5 pages of a covering letter, I was always advised, people might not get beyond page 1, so make sure there's an impact, and ideally 2 pages, but 3 at absolute most. So I would be continuously refining your template covering letter. Use AI if you need to. It can be very helpful at making what you've written more concise, but think about how you pitch it and practice it. I know many organizations where they do the virtual networking and they give you 45 seconds or 60 seconds and they cut you off. So I had to really learn to condense my intro and get my USP across through doing those. So take up those opportunities. And actually, if you think your skills and your diversity and your experience don't fit the organization, then look for the next one, because it's probably not going to be right for you and you wouldn't enjoy it.
Thank you, Sarah. And 2 things to add to that is, if they have said your CV or cover letter needs to be a certain number of pages long, stick to it, because organisations and search firms, when they're using them, get very frustrated. Lots of nods here when candidates don't fit that. But also, if they have said you can have a conversation with them beforehand, go for it, because it's an opportunity for you to explain your context. But like Sarah said, you are going to need to be concise in how you do that. So maybe some practice might be helpful beforehand. If you want to have a conversation, I'd be up for having a chat with you after this. So can I ask each of you, what would your final message be for people that are watching this, that are thinking about applying for a housing association board, that have never applied for one before and potentially are outside the sector as well? Vipul, I'll come to you first.
I'll go back to what I started. It's a great opportunity to make a difference. So it's about using your expertise, whether it's the soft skills, hard skills, or whatever. And it's an opportunity for social good. So think about being socially hearted, commercially minded. It's a great experience to work with like-minded people. But when you decide to do that, be very clear why you want to pursue this role. Understand what it means. Understand the area in which the relevant housing association is working, the geography, who they house. If you do get a chance, go and visit some estates and get a feel, talk to some resident board members, get a view about how they work, about the passion, the culture, the purpose, and understand the time commitments, which we all talked about it. And I would ideally say 3 tips: speak to an existing board member or 2, research the role, and speak to one of us who've done this role, and we will be able to help you.
Thank you, Vipul. And we do always say that if you've got an interview, please get in touch and we'll find you someone to speak to before the interview so you can have a bit of prep. Ibby, I'll come to you.
I think my final message would be, it's very easy to get involved in lots of different things within the housing sector. So you'll get a lot of emails and messages of conferences, of training. So I think one of the things is to look after yourself as well through the journey. If you are successful in being an NED in the housing association, and making sure that you allow enough time within the role, but also without the role as well, and not get too sort of bogged down and find that it becomes a burden. The other thing I think is go out and visit and go and actually speak to the people, to the customers that are receiving your services. It's very easy to sort of have the papers in front of you and find out the information from those papers, but you don't really get around to picturing the real flavour until you actually go out on those visits and those stop and speak to customers as well when you do those tours. So I think it's very important that you have your ear to the ground in some way.
Thank you, Ibby. And I loved your comment earlier as well about making sure if there is a question that you've got, quite quickly, quite early on, you start talking to the exec or the other non-execs and making sure you're getting their input on whatever question you've got.
Yeah.
Don't let it build up. Just go for it. Be honest, be open right from the start. Thank you, Ibby. Sarah.
Well, great advice already from my colleagues here. So I won't repeat what's already been said, but I will repeat what I said earlier, which is it is a great sector. So if you choose to go into it, I think you will really enjoy it. And for those who are looking to apply, I'd probably give you my 4Ps, which is preparation, really understand the sector, the organisation, the people on the panel that you are going to be meeting with if you get to interview. Proxy. So if you haven't been a NED before and this is your first role, find that proxy board experience, even if it's, the local cricket club being the treasurer of, but demonstrate that you can operate in that committee meeting, board meeting style environment. Passion, it goes a really long way. I think that's probably why I got my first roles without experience in the sector, is the passion for the sector and specifically for that organisation. And purpose, articulate your purpose, your value add, and you will find that you are making a real difference if you join the board of a housing association. So if we haven't managed to put you off, then there's a lot of housing associations and you will find the right one for you. Sometimes you have to be patient. Don't allow yourself to become frustrated applying for every single role that comes up every single week. You've got to read the role brief and believe that if there are 6 things that they want, that you have at least 3 of them.
Thank you, Sarah, Vipul and Ibby, for your time. I really appreciate you sharing your experience of joining housing boards today. And if you've been watching this, just wanted to encourage you, please do check out the roles on dynamic boards. There's 6-year churn, means there's roles coming up all the time. So please do have a look on the site and you will be in the loop when there's a housing role potentially in the region that you live in or work in. And good luck if you are applying for roles. We would love to cheer you on all the way. Please do keep in touch.